Hi guys, welcome to my classroom. I am going to be sharing with you some of my research and some of my struggles with my analysis of the classic short story by Charlotte Gilman, The Yellow Wallpaper. I will be focusing on the feminist lens, feminist theory, as well as some of the different aspects as far as how to approach how this classic was originally taken in the original time period that it was written and how it's evolved into a piece that is regarded as a strong feminist representation from the first wave of feminism. I would really appreciate some feedback. I'm still tweaking my thesis statement and I'm still working through really just how to organize and tackle uh, the literary analysis as a research. So I'll be walking you through a PowerPoint of some of my key ideas for the paper, and I look forward to hearing the feedback. First kind of place where I started my research when I sat down to really think about what text I wanted to choose for my final project for this course. Honestly, I had just tackled or just started thinking about tackling the yellow wallpaper in my AP literature class with my high school students. My past experiences with the text, of course, as an undergraduate, studied in my women's literature course. It was a short story that I had perused and attempted to study as an undergraduate several times. And so it was always a text that offered so many layers of meaning for me. And I had always found it a very interesting text, as well as one currently that I have taught in my AP literature course for several years. Is found in my literature anthology that I share with students, and is really a text that they are able to get a lot out of. Not only from the feminist theory, but also I use it as an aspect of Gothic literature. And as I dove deeper into my research and some of the literary journals, I was able to actually discover some things about the Gothic aspect of this text. So that's really where I started out as. It was just something that I had studied with my students, that I had studied as an undergrad, and I was really looking off of some of the advice from some of the readings from our text to really go and try to dig in and find some things that maybe were fresh about this story. I think that's a struggle that I've had, really being worried about, is my research something new? Is it something that others will want to hear about? So I'll walk you through some of the points that I've made in my original draft and that I've gained through some of my research. And hopefully you guys can give me some advice on where to take it from there. That I have crafted and worked on several times. I still think this needs a little work, as far as I'm not sure if I'm going too broad or if this is really focused enough. So I appreciate some feedback here. If you'll take a look at my thesis, although modern literary critics have questioned the validity of Gilman's motives for writing her classic piece, as well as if it fits the true feminist lens, The Yellow Wallpaper is a true reflection of Gilman's challenging the traditional gender roles typical of 19th century society. And as I sat down to go through the research, although I'm familiar with the idea of this story, this narrator from The Yellow Wallpaper, this woman being based on experience that Gilman actually went through as a woman in the 19th century with her postpartum depression and some of her questioning of societal expectations and norms. That's really where I grounded most of my early research. In my intro to my paper, I go into and I found a lot of interesting, just deeper research that went through some of her specific things and questioning of medical treatment at the time, medical treatment of depression, of postpartum depression, as well as how that seeped into, the male population, patriarchal population that really just ignored the views of women, their feelings, their drive, their wanting to be artists and writers. And so that's really where my initial research started. And then as I continued to try to focus in on the theory of feminism, which was pretty easy to do. I really wanted to push myself to also look for some other, feelings and critiques and literary critical analysis of this story that would bring in some new ideas. Into the research several weeks ago, I really started with finding a lot of research, as most of you who have studied the story are aware of, about the idea of the narrator in the yellow wallpaper being based, of course, on Gilman herself. And so as I looked at how I was going to approach this lit analysis, I have to go to characterization, such a strong presence of so many layers to that narrator. And so my research initially brought me, of course, to the biographical ties and the idea behind Gilman's own struggle with mental illness and her own struggle with physicians of the time, and how mental illness and postpartum depression was approached with the idea behind the rest cure. And so as I initially started to look at her reactions and her approach to gaining a voice and making some changes around this, it of course brought up additional research that discussed her being not really popular as far as a feminist author until the 1970s. That initially she just wrote this story, of course, as what I believe and what many critics believe, a commentary on questioning societal roles of women in their marriages, in their home, and how that led to the discovering, in the 1970s, of these waves of feminism, her being representative of the first wave, which focused on what she knew at the time, focused on her life as an upper to middle class white woman who was brought into a marriage and expected to act a certain way and not to have a mind of her own, and her struggles with that. And we see that in the narrator. And so this brought me to my first initial research. And then, of course, I've spent so much time in the last few weeks focusing in on comparisons, not only of the yellow wallpaper, but her writings in general, and where it's kind of gotten as far as the feminist lens. And then eventually I discovered some good points made around Gothicism and how of this story was originally written and based on the idea of Gothic literature, and how the yellow wallpaper was influenced very heavily by Poe's work because it was so popular at the time. And the fact that Gilman didn't go into this necessarily approaching it as, okay, I want this female voice, but the idea behind that women up to that point were really portrayed as these monsters. These women didn't have an opportunity to really break free from what was expected unless they were brought about as this crazy female character in these horror stories, these 19th century what was considered horror stories. And so that's really kind of where I have ended some of my research. I was very intrigued by some of this, as well as some ideas behind, influences of Gilman and how she really continues to influence this theory, this wave, and this creation of female narrators and roles of females in